"You dirty rats" may have been a famous Hollywood mob phrase, but in reality, informants weren't tolerated in the mob, and even today's modern gangs and mobsters don't take lightly to snitches, even though we're encouraged to report wrongdoings to the police. You know the saying, snitches get stitches. Felons such as Whitey Bulger and John Gotti once ran the law and streets how they pleased, until their evil ways finally convinced their lower-level soldiers to turn on them. We look at 10 famous mob members that turned informant. Joseph the Animal Barboza. Joseph Barboza worked as a hitman in Boston and other parts of New England for the Patriarca crime family in the 1960s. He was a skilled chef specializing in Portuguese cuisine, and he also had a brief career as a light heavyweight boxer before he turned his attention to murder. Barboza served a stint in prison in Massachusetts in the early 1950s and became involved with the Patriarca organized crime family while he was behind bars. The mob was attracted to Barboza's violent demeanor and his ability to carry out a contract killing with no hassle. However, he could never be officially inducted into the Patriarca mob because of his Portuguese heritage. Barboza had a falling out with the Patriarca family in the late 1960s and felt he only had one option left. He agreed to cooperate with the FBI and talk about what he knew about organized crime in New England. He testified against his former boss in court, and his former associates were furious. Barboza's testimony led to the imprisonment of 6 mobsters, with 4 of them receiving death sentences. He became one of the first people to enter the witness protection program. Barboza moved to Northern California to start a new life. Eventually, vengeful Boston gangsters from his past tracked him down. On February 11, 1976, Barboza was shot and killed while leaving a friend's apartment in San Francisco. Giovanni Brusca. Brusca operated in the land where La Cosa Nostra began, Italy. Brusca was born in Sicily in 1957, and he was born into the mafia. His father, grandfather, and great-grandfather were all made men. He moved through the ranks quickly and became an adept, ruthless killer. It is estimated that Brusca killed over 100 people. He was nicknamed the Pig because of his unkempt appearance and his voracious appetite for food. In 1992, Brusca took part in the assassination of Giovanni Falcone, a prosecutor known for convicting mafia members. Brusca and his associates planted a half-ton bomb below a street in Palermo. When Falcone's car passed over the bomb, it was detonated remotely by Brusca. Falcone, his wife, and 3 police officers were killed in the blast. The bomb was so strong that it registered on local earthquake monitors. Brusca did not limit his murderous intent toward enemies or even adults. Women and children were a target if they got in the way, and he wasn't above torture tactics to achieve his goals. Finally, on May 20th, 1996, Brusca was captured by the police. He did what a lot of other criminals do when faced with prison time. He cooperated with authorities and began to talk. Brusca confessed to murders that he himself had committed and told the police about the crimes of other mafia members. Despite the dozens of murders he committed with his own hands, Brusca was given a 26-year prison term in exchange for his testimony. Abe Relis Kid Twist. Relis stole his nickname of Kid Twist from a gangster idol and pursued a life of crime. By the age of 34 in 1940, he had been arrested 42 times, 6 times for murder, and had served 6 prison terms. In jail again and fearing prosecution for murder, he began talking to Brooklyn District Attorney William O'Dwyer on March 23, 1940. He told about a national organization widely dubbed Murder Inc., to which he belonged and which dealt in murder for hire. Its leaders included Louis Lepke Buchalter and Albert Anastasia. He supplied dozens of dates, persons, and places, providing the authorities with information on some 70 unsolved murders that had been performed by contract. Prosecutions began and several gunmen went to the electric chair. In 1940, Buchalter was convicted, but before Anastasia could be brought to trial, Relis's usefulness ended. He had been lodged in Coney Island's Half Moon Hotel, guarded by 18 policemen in 3 shifts round the clock. Nevertheless, on the morning of November 12, 1941, he fell from a window to his death. The official verdict was that, while alone, he had tried to escape and accidentally fell. Joe Valachi. In 1963, convicted New York mobster Valachi broke the mafia's sacred code of silence to become an informant, revealing key details about the organization's structure and customs. The first member to publicly acknowledge the existence of the American Mafia, he later published his memoirs entitled The Valachi Papers about his years as a low-ranking soldier for the Lucchese and Genovese crime families. Though Valachi's motives for telling all remain unclear, he may have spilled the beans to avoid the death penalty for a murder he committed while incarcerated. Valachi died in prison in 1971 with a $100,000 mob bounty still on his head. Joseph the Ear Massino. In 2004, Massino made history by becoming the first official mafia boss to cooperate with federal authorities. Hoping to avoid the death penalty after being convicted for 7 murders, the longtime Bonanno crime family boss agreed to wear a wire during conversations with his successor, implicated many of his former associates, and revealed the location of an infamous mob graveyard to the FBI. He was sentenced in June 2005 to life in prison. In June 2013, Massino was sentenced to time served and supervised release for the remainder of his life. Salvatore Sammy the Bull Gravano. Still alive in 2021, Gravano was a prolific hitman with quite a colorful background. He rose through the ranks of both the Colombo and Gambino crime families in the 1960s and 1970s. Promoted to underboss in the late 1980s by the infamous Gambino kingpin John Gotti, Gravano was arrested alongside his boss during a raid on the Ravenite Social Club, their hangout in New York City's Little Italy neighborhood. The next year, he cut a deal with the government and testified in court against Gotti in exchange for a reduced sentence, becoming the man responsible for Teflon Don's downfall. Gravano later entered the witness protection program, had plastic surgery to better hide from the mob, and moved to Arizona. However, the mafia turncoat refused to abandon his life of crime, gaining a 19-year sentence for running an ecstasy trafficking ring along with his wife and children. Talk about keeping it in the family. Gravano was listed as being in the Arizona State Prison System at a CO Special Services unit. He was initially scheduled to be released in March 2019, however, he was released early on September 18, 2017. In December 2020, Gravano started a YouTube channel and a podcast titled Our Thing, and he even has a website. Tommaso Buscetta. Tommaso was an Italian mobster and a member of the Sicilian Mafia. Buscetta became one of the first of its members to turn informant and explain the inner workings of the organization. Born in Sicily in 1928, Buscetta began working for the Italian Mafia as a teenager. He later moved to the United States and developed ties to the Gambino crime family. In 1983, after 2 failed attempts to seek refuge in Brazil, Buscetta was arrested and sent back to Italy to serve time for a prior murder conviction. Repulsed by a bloody gang war within the Sicilian Mafia and the murders of several of his family members, he became an informant, helping authorities make key arrests on both sides of the Atlantic and exposing corrupt Italian politicians. In return, he was allowed to return to the United States and entered the witness protection program. He died in New York in 2000. Frank Lucas. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, Lucas controlled Manhattan's largest heroin ring, buying directly from his connections in Asia and smuggling the drugs into the United States. Talk about cutting out the overhead. Lucas boasted that he smuggled heroin using the coffins of dead American servicemen. Worth many millions at the time of his 1975 arrest, he was sentenced to 70 years in prison. He soon turned informant, naming dozens of mafia accomplices and corrupt New York police officers in exchange for a 15-year sentence. The biopic American Gangster was based on his life starring Denzel Washington. In his last years, Lucas was confined to a wheelchair due to a car accident which broke his legs. Lucas died at the age of 88 on May 30, 2019. Max Mermelstein. A mechanical engineer born in New York, Mermelstein became involved with the now-defunct Medellin drug cartel through his Colombian wife's friends and relatives in the 1970s. He smuggled an estimated $360 million worth of cocaine into the United States before the law caught up with him in June 1985. Mermelstein agreed to inform on his associates and entered the witness protection program along with 16 of his extended family members. His testimony resulted in numerous indictments and helped bring the Medellin cartel to its knees. In the words of the U.S. Attorney for Los Angeles, Mermelstein was probably the single most valuable government witness in drug matters that this country has ever known. Pursued by Pablo Escobar until the drug lord's death in 1993, Mermelstein died of cancer in 2008. Henry Hill. Another famous mobster that inspired movies and books, Henry was born in Brooklyn in 1943, and he was involved with the Lucchese crime family from a young age. He helped spearhead several high-profile heists during his career, including the infamous 1967 theft of $420,000 in cash from the Air France terminal at New York's John F. Kennedy International Airport, the equivalent of roughly $3.2 million in 2021, and later a much larger robbery from the Lufthansa terminal in 1978. Arrested for drug trafficking in 1980, Hill became convinced that several of his former associates had a hit out on him and decided to come clean, divulging information that led to 50 convictions. He entered the witness protection program, but was ejected in the early 1990s for continuing to commit crimes. Hill's life inspired the book Wise Guy and the film Goodfellas. Hill died of complications related to heart disease in a Los Angeles hospital on June 12, 2012, after a long battle with his illness a day after his 69th birthday. Many dead or still imprisoned, and some still alive. The old days of the mob are gone, as a few of the older mobsters live peacefully, unfearing of retribution as the mob days have faded. Gangsters such as Sammy the Bull and Michael Franzese have paid their dues and even took up an honorable living, such as capitalizing on their ex-wife on the internet, making an honest living. Still, we all find it interesting to look back sometimes at the dangerous and crazy times of the mob. Until next time.